The day before my birthday in 2011, I went to sleep having watched the news and knowing that the remnants of Hurricane Irene would be coming my way outside of Albany, New York. I woke up the morning of my birthday to a stillness that follows the wake of a big storm, and I turned on the news only to realize that the storm had ravaged large parts of upstate New York. Flooding was rampant, and it left homes and churches and businesses filled with several feet of mud and muck. It was 1987, I was 10, and I went to sleep, only to awaken the next morning to the sound of snowplows outside of my bedroom window. Now, that was not a strange sound. It was Albany, New York. What was strange was that it was October 4th. So in addition to the strange sound of snowplows in October was this strange, eerie sound of crashing and cracking that was happening. Because when a winter storm hits that early in October, all the leaves have not yet fallen off. And so all of the snow and ice on top of those leaves causes the branches all to break. And so they would break and snap and echo throughout the land, and we had no power. Great delight when you're 10, super fun. We had no power for days. Some people had no power for over a week until the power was restored. We all have these stories of storms. Storms that we've experienced, that nature has done around us, and there's nothing that we can do about it. In instances like this, some of the most, shall we say, questionable theology begins to surface. God must be punishing the people of wherever. Or God must have made this happen. Or God did it so that we can be helpers. Or other similarly questionable lines of thinking. But what do we do with a psalm like the one that we just heard, where we hear that God's voice is in the waters and in the fires and in the thunder? Is that not true? Because can God and does God really cause the storm? Is God in the storm? And if so, why then doesn't God stop the storm? Right? Why does God allow destruction from these storms? There's not really a good, clear answer here. But I'm guessing that we can sort of agree that some of these understandings are, shall we say, less than helpful in the wake of storms that happen around us. But what is helpful is knowing and believing that God is present with us in the midst of a storm. That God is with all of us when we face storms, whether they're nature storms or the storms of our own making that happen in our lives. Now, I happen to believe that God does not cause the storms out of anger or anything that anyone has done or not done. Nature storms just are. We can talk about our role in the climate another time. Storms just are. But it's in the midst of these storms that God is with us. God is present with us. God can bring us peace regardless of what is swirling around us if we allow it. God can still us if we can recognize it. And in the midst of whatever is happening around us, God can bring us peace and bring us stillness as the storm continues around us. There's a translation or a version of the psalm that Jen read, Psalm 29, that's called the Everyday Psalm, written by James Taylor. I don't think it's the same James Taylor. And it says it this way: before God's power, you face your own frailty. Nothing can save you except God. Only God is greater than any human crisis. Only God can sustain you through the storm and carry you to the calm of the other side. Friends, in the midst of storms, natural storms and life storms, God is present with us. God sustains us through the storm. And it's in moments of storm that I think of Mr. Rogers, the Reverend Rogers, and his theology comes out in a helpful way here. And he says, to this day, especially in times of disaster, we can read storm, I remember my mother's words, and I am always comforted by realizing that there are so many helpers, so many caring people in the world. Our God does indeed work through the hands of human helpers in the midst of crisis. God works through the actions of concerned people all over when chaos is swirling. Following Hurricane Irene, the RPMs, which was the name of the youth group in the Methodist church I was serving, and it stood for the Reformed kids and the Presbyterian kids and the Methodist kids, the RPMs, those kids always went on a spring break mission trip. And they lived in upstate New York, and they had decided that those spring break mission trips were going to be to warm climates. And they always took their trip someplace south, someplace warm, to do good work. That year, they met the month after Irene hit, and they said, we're not going. We want to stay put. And they went 30 minutes away. Same cold climate, same bitter rains of the springtime. And they spent the week mucking out people's basements who had yet to figure out how to get their basements cleaned out. They relayed sheetrock in the homes of people who had figured out how to get it cleared out, but they didn't have the money to get the sheetrock put back up. They laid flooring in the houses of people who again, had figured out how to get the mud out, but they didn't have the money to put the flooring in. They gave up their spring break, warm, although they were always helpful trips, to be close at home, to be helpful, to be God's hands and feet following that storm. That's where God is in the midst of storms. Not causing the rain to fall, not causing the flooding, but in the hands and feet of people. In the midst of the storm, in the boat, Jesus asks the disciples, "Where is your faith?" It takes faith in the midst of a storm that is swirling all around us, that is so powerful. It takes faith to recognize God's peace in the midst of that. It takes faith to recognize God breathing a sense of stillness into us in the midst of the storm. It takes faith to be still enough to hear God's quiet, still speaking voice, calling us to peace and to calm and to help. It takes faith, not faith in a God who caused the storm, but faith in a God who's there in the midst of the storm. Faith in a God whose love is so abundant that we are not alone in the storm. That's the faith that Jesus urges us toward. That's how we ride out the storms that inevitably come our way. And that is the good news. And for that we say thanks be to God. Amen.